While AAA titles are the bread and butter of the gaming industry, there comes a splash of jam, the indie developers. Yet rarer still are games developed by a single individual. Chained Echoes, released at the tail end of 2022, was developed solely by Matthias Linda, a German developer who aimed to capture the experience he felt playing games like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, and Legend of Dragoon, while being careful to ensure his game had its own identity. Developed across a 7-year span with a successful Kickstarter campaign in 2019, the game came out to massive praise from both critics and audiences alike. And it was on Game Pass, so... I'm Billy S, welcome back to Billy's Backlog. Today we're taking a look at Chained Echoes via the PC Game Pass, as I introduce you to an absolutely stellar love letter to the JRPG genre, and proof that indie developers really are continuing all your favourite franchises, just with their own coats of paint. So why was Chained Echoes in my backlog? Long story short, I saw many mutuals on Twitter talking about it, especially Hayden A, and his tweets convinced me to check the game out, citing it was surprisingly dark, and the plot went to places you wouldn't think. What I wasn't expecting was a game with incredibly tight combat, and a battle system that feels both familiar yet unique at the same time, wrapped up in a fairly interesting plot, ripe with love from the developer for the world building in place. Chained Echoes takes place on the continent of Valandis, where a multi-generational war between the main three kingdoms threatens to tear everything asunder. You play as Glenn, a mercenary who, while on a mission with his merc band, is tricked into triggering an artifact called the Grand Grimoire, causing a powerful magic explosion that devastates the land. A year later, you're introduced to the rest of your main party through an interesting ensemble opening act, allowing you to get a feel for all of the different movesets on offer, while also allowing each character to show off who they are personality-wise. From fighting in a goblin cave with a secret princess and her prejudiced yet well-meaning bodyguard, to robbing the townspeople blind as the red succubus herself, to exploring a fair with an acclaimed playwright with a spot of snail racing? Ultimately, your party comes together in a climactic battle, and the plot pushes you forwards across the kingdom. You'll explore a large variety of unique biomes on your journey, each with their own hostile enemies to take down, quests to complete, and bosses to slay, each scored to a beautiful soundtrack by, and I apologize if I get this pronunciation wrong, Eddie Marianocro, who really captured the feeling and essence of the genre and style. This is your classic JRPG with the bells and whistles, a world-saving plot that takes you all across the continent, turn-based combat that allows you to take your time and strategize to your heart's content, and even mecha battles from Act 2 onwards that changes how you play the game completely. And we can't forget about those good old skill trees, or in this case, skill lists. In Chained Echoes, you don't level up with experience, a massive departure from the genre. Instead, you level up using a resource called Grimoire Shards. More often, these can be obtained by defeating bosses, but you can also get them by completing quests on your reward board. Once earned, you can then access the skill lists of each character and choose new skills to unlock. There are 3 lists you can pick from: main skills that you select from the skills menu in battle, passive abilities which are active as long as you have them equipped, and stat buffs, which are self-explanatory. No matter how you want to build your character, it's worth noting that when I 100% completed the game, I was able to unlock every skill from all 3 lists. So feel free to play how you want. And also subscribe to Billy S, 90% of my viewers aren't subscribed. Let's rectify that. This progression system means you can't over-level in Chained Echoes beyond getting better equipment and equipping gemstones to your gear, which is a system I'll touch upon in a bit. By winning fights, you gain SP instead of experience, which can be used to upgrade your skills and passives into stronger variants. Usually this results in a slightly increased stat or slightly higher damage percentage. You can only carry a maximum of 999 SP at a time though, so be sure to spend it often and don't think too hard about it. All of this allows the developer to craft a surprisingly effective difficulty curve, as he roughly knows what level the party will be when they reach certain story beats. This may turn some players off who enjoy the idea of over-leveling and destroying everything in their path, but I'd say that's a small price to pay for seeing your vision through. There is also a class system in this game where you can obtain special class items that help you buff specific stats and gain access to special class skills. You gain these by completing special trial battles throughout the world, which you can access by using a sacred water and praying at Heroes of Leonar statues. Admittedly, I didn't use many of the class skills, but I did appreciate the basic stat buffs you got by having these equipped. Another way to buff yourself is by enhancing your equipment with gems mined throughout the world, but I'm gonna be honest, the entire gemstone system is very convoluted. You need to merge gemstones of the same types to create stronger variations, but depending on their purity, they take up more or less slots in your equipment. It's a tedious affair. You're often upgrading your weapons and gear, only to then find newer, better items minutes later, meaning you'll have to deslot your crystals from your current weapon, and then reslot them into the new ones, but if your new weapon isn't at its +2 variant, you may not be able to slot all the gems back into place. This game did not need both a weapon upgrade system and a gem system. One or the other would have been preferable and easier to balance around, not both. Now, while the setup for your party can be a bit tedious, the combat once you're in battle is extremely tight. Like classic JRPGs, you have 4 active party members who can fight at one time, with 4 backup members who each have to be assigned to one of your 4 main fighters, with 12 recruitable characters overall. For example, I could have Glenn as a main fighter and assign him to Bathraz, my beloved, as his backup. Then, on Glenn's turn, I can freely switch to Bathraz whenever I want. Switching characters out also doesn't take up your action, it's a completely free movement which I love, and sometimes it's required, as if one of your characters gets staggered, you have to switch them out to remove the effect. You can mix and match your party however you want. My only recommendation would be to have as many varied move types as possible, because you'll need them when engaging with Chained Echo's main battle mechanic, the Overdrive Bar. In battle, every action causes your overdrive bar to fill or deplete. When it's in yellow, you're neutral, but when you enter the green area, you hit overdrive. Attacks hit harder, you take less damage, and moves cost less TP to cast. You want to reach the overdrive state as quickly as possible. But if you get carried away and spam skills, you'll eventually overheat. This is effectively the enemy's overdrive state, putting you on the back foot. The only way to lower your overdrive bar is to perform an action that matches the currently displayed icon in the top left of the screen. This is why you need a varied party with different skill sets, so on a moment's notice, you can lower your overdrive bar and juggle it as needed. You'll notice that the moves you need to use to lower your overdrive bar will be highlighted in yellow. When first starting out, basic battles won't last long enough for the meter to have an effect, but once you start facing larger groups of enemies, or some of the game's more challenging, lengthy boss fights, you are expected to at least understand how to use the overdrive bar to your advantage, especially when many boss fights actually play around with the overdrive mechanic in unique and terrifying ways. I won't spoil those here though. You can alternatively collect overdrive items which correspond to specific effects, buffs, heal, attack, magic, etc., and use them if the character you're on in the turn order doesn't have the right skills. And you can also switch out with your character's assigned backup character to lower the bar as well. It's a lot, and I'm aware my explanation was not the best, I apologize, but it's a battle system that I feel works a lot better in practice once you've had some first-hand experience. Some enemies can also be pilfered, so keep Sienna around so she can loot their asses, and some enemies can also be canned. This is tied to a specific optional party member, Tomk, who can only obtain skills by turning specific enemies into cans and consuming them. Beyond that, most enemies will have elemental weaknesses, so having magic users on hand to deliver the coup de grace is important. Len and Bathraz absolutely carry in that department. Combine that with Sienna's ability to crit just about everything after you've leveled up her stats, and you've got some unstoppable party members waiting to tear the place up. You shouldn't be afraid to use skills and go all out either, as once you finish a fight, your health and TP will be completely restored, taking away the stress of micromanaging your party's status after every bout, which once again allows the developer to fine-tune battles to a specific difficulty, knowing you'll be fully prepared for every engagement. At the start of Act 2, once you gain access to your party's sky armor, battles work a little differently. I won't go into too much detail here, but you can cycle through your armor through 3 gears, 1, 2, and 0. Depending on your gear, you'll move the overdrive bar to the left, right, or not at all. You can only restore TP in Gear 0, but that's also your weakest gear. Gear 1 is your neutral gear, while Gear 2 has extremely strong attacks. You can't put every character in the same gear though, or you'll overheat very quickly. I really enjoyed the tactical strategy of the mecha battles at first, but as the game went on, they started to drag a bit. Part of this is because aside from upgrading your mecha's frame and working on a small selection of different weapons and guns, your strategies for beating the tougher enemies and certain bosses ultimately ends up being exactly the same. At least when you're on the ground fighting with your full party, you have 8 different characters at a time to swap between. But with the mechs, it's just the 4 of you up there, and you go through the motions. Feels good to rack up high damage numbers, and it's worth training your sky armors to handle all the different weapon and gun types, as they also come with permanent stat boosts, but the regular combat was where I had the most fun. Sky armors are very useful when it comes to area exploration though, as you're able to fly through almost every area of the game. You can summon your armor at any time as long as you have access to the sky, so caverns and dungeons are a no-go, as is the Fjordwoods open zone as the canopy is too thick for the sky armors to penetrate. Once you have your armor though, every area becomes a playground to explore. You can complete tasks and clear up any extra rewards on the reward board. You'll often find little areas containing better gear, and sometimes sky armor chests with more parts. Though, fair warning, some areas do contain anti-air cannons you have to disable on foot before being able to fly with your sky armor. Exploration in Chained Echoes reminded me the most, honestly, of 2D Xenoblade Chronicles, complete with unique monsters you can slay, with interesting appearance rates, materials to collect, and treasures you can find laying about on the ground. Having come straight from Xenoblade 3 before I played this, I felt right at home and found the exploration pretty rewarding. As I briefly mentioned, this game has a reward board as well as side quests to handle as the main plot presses on. The reward board is something you can access the moment you leave Farnsport. It's a series of tasks for each zone of the game, such as defeat a certain number of enemies, find all the secret caves and buried treasure, win a battle with a specific setup, defeat a unique enemy, finish a side quest, etc. Your goal is to create a chain by completing as many quests that are next to each other on the board, and as your chain grows, you gain access to various reward items. Just don't be like me and forget that you actually have to go to each mission individually on the reward board and select it once completed to actually claim your prize. Though admittedly, leaving a stockpile of missions you haven't claimed can be a good source of money in the late game when things start costing more, so maybe keep that in mind too. Side quests, meanwhile, are a small series of story-related quests that will either introduce optional characters you can recruit, introduce you to NPCs that you'll eventually be able to recruit to your island clan, among other things. I personally think we could have used a couple more side quests, maybe 1 or 2 focusing on some of the main party. My favourite quest was the final one I did, No Place for Happy Endings, as it focuses on Rob, your party's ranger, and why his personality is the way it is. He is not everybody's favourite character, but he's been through a lot, and the ending of this quest shows a very realistic portrayal of somebody who wants to change for the better, but understands that removing these prejudiced views that were hard-coded into him from his birth is gonna take time. In a world of cancel culture where we don't give enough people the time to change their points of view, Chained Echoes really goes above and beyond to show a healthy dynamic of somebody trying to change their ways. Now then, the last thing I want to discuss in this video is the game's story. I'm not going to go in depth, but I have some general notes that I'd like to share, as this isn't a perfectly told tale, and I'd like the developer to improve moving forwards. The overall world of Valandis is very dark. It often feels like tragedies are happening constantly, and for a world where a war has raged for over 150 years, I get it, but like when you play a horror game and you constantly get attacked by monsters, playing Chained Echoes and constantly getting buffeted by tragic events makes you desensitized to them. Killian's sister was a rather egregious example. It's the first scene we find out she exists, and then for anyone who's actually played the game, you know what they drop on us. It's very dark. Had we had dialogue on our journey up to that point that perhaps referenced his family or his sister, so we'd think, oh, what's up with that? I'd be more receptive to the dark nature there. And by the time we had reached the flying continent Shambhala and recruited Egil, I was completely desensitized. I felt the wrap-up to his village's storyline was just so unnecessary and sad for the sake of being sad, and the game doesn't quite recover from this feeling. If the writing was superb, I could forgive the needless tragedy. Look at the Game of Thrones books as an example of a pretty awful world where the tragedies still hit me because of the talent of the author. In Chained Echoes, however, the writing is, for lack of a better term, very stilted. I can tell that it was written by someone whose first language is not English. Every now and then I'd come across a spelling mistake or a wrong word, but perhaps the biggest factor to this feeling is that this game suffers from all of the characters sounding the same. Obviously, their outward personalities are different, but when you put most of the characters in a room and tell them to talk, you find that dialogue tends to blend together unless your name is Sienna, Bathraz, or Amalia. For me, a good indicator is the consistency of the type of slang a character uses. For example, if a character says things like do not or could not instead of don't or couldn't. I know that sounds a bit pedantic and a little bit nitpicky, but that is just how I felt reading this game's dialogue. I can tell it needed a native English speaker proofreader to really tighten those screws. The pixel art, the animations, and the world itself has so much personality, so it's a shame that I couldn't really get that from the dialogue. Chained Echoes also suffers from a plot that struggles to carry the weight of its many threads. When the credits rolled, there were so many unanswered questions, it felt like we'd only wrapped up a small portion of the plot, a singular adventure in a sea of mysteries. It does leave the game open to a sequel, but I got Golden Sun Dark Dawn flashbacks when the game ended, and I realized just how many plot points didn't get wrapped up. Given this was a one-developer job, there's no guarantee we'll get a sequel, but it certainly feels like there was so much more planned for this game that just couldn't get added because budget. If we do get a sequel though, I would hope it focuses on the wider world, taking us away from Valandis, because the world building leaves so much potential content to explore. The story for me is middle of the road, but with a ton of potential, and I can see the love put into it by the developer. We all start somewhere after all, but Chained Echoes is, in my opinion, at its best when you're battling powerful enemies and taking on the challenges presented in the gameplay. There are a couple of bugs you might need to watch out for though, as I got hit by this pretty brutal one on screen now, after getting a game over during a Hero of Leonard challenge, and I was worried I was about to lose my whole save, but in hindsight it actually is quite funny. In conclusion, I think Chained Echoes is a bloody brilliant effort for a one-person dev team, and the amount of praise I've seen from fans of the genre show that there's an audience out there for games like this. I hope the developer can take the good feedback and the critical feedback into his future projects to create something that will hopefully be even better than this. He's got the know-how to make a game fun. It just really needs tighter writing and a little bit of condensation. That's probably not the word I was looking for. Condensed. Needs to be condensed. But I can confirm I loved my time with Chained Echoes to the point where, as I said, I 100%ed the game, defeating the game's super bosses and completing everything on the reward board. Critique and praise go hand in hand, and Chained Echoes may be flawed, but by God is it satisfying to play. Thank you everyone for watching. I admittedly struggled with this video's script, but I hope I didn't come across too harshly. I just want to see the developer succeed, but that can't happen without valid critique, and I hope I was good. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. My socials are on screen now. Feel free to follow where you feel comfortable, and a massive shout out to my patrons on the left there. You guys are the reason I can keep creating content. Thank you so much. You can play Chained Echoes on pretty much all platforms, and I'll see you next week for another Billy's Backlog. Bye-bye!